financial crisis, everybody was interested in healthcare. And I think a lot of people realized that we had really beaten up on employees and others in the economy, that you weren't going to get them to improve on their health, right? You weren't, a big health plan wasn't going to be able to go to somebody, or a health or an employer that just fired a bunch of people wasn't going to be able, please go take care of yourself. They'd be like, screw you, right? So you just got a sense that this was going to be a time. But what also
Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. And guys, we have a very special guest on today. We're going to be talking to the CEO and founder of the Lonely Entrepreneur organization, which we're going to be diving into a lot of what that is and what that stands for and what they're doing over there. But this individual, we're going to be talking about his background as well. In 2008, he almost lost his whole business. His whole business almost had 500 employees, and within 10 days, almost losing it, going bankrupt. Now he was able to pivot, which we're going to be diving in, all the story, all the background, and then being able to pivot and then being able to successfully grow that, and then as well have an amazing exit. And one of the leading entrepreneurs in this industry, which is going to be a lot of fun, and kind of what he was able to do to revolutionize the health industry. Please welcome my next guest, the one and only Michael Dermer. How you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me. That's some introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Well, you definitely can, and I'm so excited about having you on, because one of the things that I think is so fun is obviously during your story, it's not fun, right? The uncertainty, the stress, the anxiety, just, the responsibility that you had to have. I want to go back to Michael, when you were running this business, okay? Your business, you had 500 employees, 2008, perfect storm kind of happened, and all of a sudden, a whole bunch of uncertainty. And you had to make tough decisions. So if you can think about, imagine yourself back in those moments. You didn't know what the future exists now, what you've been able to do, the success you've been able to achieve now. But what were some of those big pivot moments? What were some of those big lessons that you learned during that period of time?
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me.
Dive into this, which I find so interesting. Obviously, when everything at a macro level, things you could not control, right? And what I found this is what you had to go through during that time is very applicable to what's going on right now, but also what will happen in the future, right? There's always booms and bust, right? And those that are CEOs and founders that are listening to this podcast, they have to sit there and they have to understand there's macro things you can't control, but there's micro things that you can control, and you have to be decisive action. And in a boom cycle, your mindset switches, and then a bust cycle, your mindset switches as a founder. Where you're leading, is you're going to be survivor? Are you growing? Are you building an empire, right? There's just different mindsets. So my question, Michael, is when you were in that situation, when you started seeing kind of the trend, you started realizing a lot of your clients were going bankrupt, you started realizing, okay, there's going to be expenses, and then there's going to be revenue way down here, right? There's going to be a misalignment. So then you had to say, okay, well, there's a realistic picture. There's a feedback loop. What are we going to make a decisive action? Well, there's certain things that we can do to right away decrease our expenses to ensure that we obviously, or maybe have a long runway in cash reserves. So help me walk through the way you were thinking about these detrimental things that were very, very quick, and how decisive action you guys had to establish, and what were those actions that you took? Well, Michael, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I find that so interesting, the journey and the way you were able to think about those tough decisions. If you could, what was the conversation like between you and your employees, and being authentic and vulnerable and saying, hey, this is where we're at. This is what it was. And as a leader, I would imagine it's humbling, that's difficult, the tears, the responsibility. What if you could just take us back during that time? What was that like working with your people and your culture during that time?
Yeah, this is big boys and girls stuff, right? First and foremost, you have to lead and paint what it looks like at the end, right? Even though that's incredibly hard to do, right? You basically have to say, listen, we started something from nothing. Now, tons and tons of health plans use this. And so this is going to be tough. We're going to be hard. We're going to do it together, but we're going to go here, and we've got to all do it together. And we're just going to, so that's really important, because remember, not only were bad things happening in the economy, but literally, if I took out the Wall Street Journal from October 16th, 2008, it would say Washington Mutual is going for bankruptcy, and people would be like, wait a minute, isn't that our biggest client? And the next day it was like, well, Countrywide Financial just is about to go bust. Isn't that our second biggest client? And General Motors needs a government bailout. Isn't that our third? Like, so it was literally in their faces every day. So the first thing you do is you have to lead. The second thing you have to do is you are always on stage as the leader, right? And the way that you handle yourself during that time. Somebody told me, paid me a really sweet compliment. Years later, we were having a party, and one of the people from my company said, "You know what? We never really worried that much because you always seemed like it was just a matter of we had to do A and B and C." She goes, "Except this one time." And I was like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "So I played college baseball. I had this little rubber baseball in my office that I used to play against the wall or whatever. Once a client had come to us and said, in the midst of all that, we're going to stay with you. We're not going to cancel, even though we should." And I was like, "That's awesome." And then a week later, they call back and says, "It's so bad, we have to cancel." And I pounded on the desk and I threw my rubber baseball against the wall. She goes, "That's the only time we ever got scared." And I was like, "Really? Over 2 years?" So you have to show them where you're going. You have to maintain a demeanor when you're getting kicked between the legs 20 times a day, which is you just have to do that, right? But the other thing we did is like you have to have look at it holistically. You have to say, okay, you need a plan for customers. Okay, there's that. You need a plan for investors, there's that. And you need a plan for employees. So with respect to employees, we said, listen, we've got to cut costs, but we know you guys are our family. Let's be creative with it. So how can we be creative? So we said, for example, let's split jobs. Like we've got to reduce it by this. So let's split jobs. So somebody will have half of this job and the other person will have half of this job. And so we don't have to let you go. We'll say if you could get health insurance from your spouse, right? Like we just did all these things together as much as we could. And we really were able to minimize the layoffs. Because if you said, hey, listen, we have to lay off a third of the staff or whatever the number was, right? Um, uh, we were able to just say, we got to carve this up. And if we carve it up, right, can we get to the same number by being creative where somebody worked a third of the time or health insurance was, they had two young kids and had like, we just got into it and got into the sausage making of all of it and it wasn't hard for us to get everybody lying because we had built this from nothing. Like all of us had been told 100 times for years and years, Christian, this will never happen. And it had happened. And so we had some very, very loyal, hardworking people, but at the same time, to your point earlier, yes, this fell on me and my team. But imagine somebody that makes $40,000 a year that has two kids. It's a lot harder for them than it would ever be for us. So you just you take a lot into account very quickly, just to try to plot your path forward.
With that being said, where did that idea come from in regards to that creative approach? It's like, okay, we need to decrease the expense by $10 million. But instead of just laying off a third like you normally would, you brought a creative. It seems like that's part of your values, or that became part of your ethos of your company. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It goes back to what I said before. It's like we can't do the normal stuff. If we do the normal stuff, it's not going to work. Right. So you got to make it. I'll give you a great story. And this is one that worked. And it's a better story because it worked than if it didn't work. So a lot of what we did in our company was we gave away rewards for being healthy. And some of those rewards were actually gift cards to retailers, to Applebee's and, whatever. And so we used to pay like 80 cents on the dollar for a gift card from a retailer, from a national retailer. So we'd pay $80 and we'd give it away to somebody for $100 and we'd make a little bit of money on that. So, we were giving away probably $15 million a month of these gift cards. Well, when everything was hunky dory, that just flowed in and out of cash flow. When all of your cash goes away, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, we need $15 million. And normally it was like you're giving away 15, we have 25, right? When this stuff happens, a month later, we need 15 and we have one. And I'm no math major, but you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be it doesn't work. So you're like, well, how do you reduce the liability of 15 million to 1 million pretty quickly? So we went to our national retail partners, all the retailers you would know, and we said, so right now we buy from 80 cents on the dollar. Nobody's walking into your store right now because of the dramatic economic times. Like, you should let us buy gift cards for 20 cents on the dollar. And they're like, nope, we're not doing that. So we literally went, our office was in northern New Jersey. And so those are conversations where with national retailers, we literally went to the local version of the retailer. So we went to the Applebee's store and we said to Applebee's, so Applebee's, we want to buy all of these gift cards, but we don't want to pay very much for them. Long story short, and it's a great story, we got locally from Applebee's gift cards for 10 cents on the dollar. So we took, and then we just literally drove up and down Route 17 in New Jersey to every retail. And if a retailer said no, if Applebee's one said no, you realize I'm going to go right down the street to the next Applebee's and give them $100,000. So we literally decreased a $15 million liability to essentially a $1.5 million liability by negotiating with all of these retail partners locally. And if they're like, we could get in trouble from national, we're like, that's your problem. We're going to hand you a check. If you get caught, you get caught. If you don't want it, we'll go to the next guy. And I literally drove up and down, even to the point where we used to go into Applebee's to pick up gift cards, right? They would, whether it was 9 in the morning, like we'd send somebody over there, it would always take a long time. And it took a long time because they would go in back and build us like the chicken wing platter. And like, because we were buying so many gift cards from them. But that actually took a $15 million liability and turned it to an $1.5 million liability almost overnight, which I don't want to say it saved the company, but it certainly didn't hurt.
I think it's so fun, the creativity that you had behind that whole thing, that whole process, and just the team that you had. Michael, I am a big believer in the concept that in business, you have to make decisions with very little data. And sometimes looking back, hindsight, you say, well, that was a bad decision, or we could have been better at it. But also in the actual pit, in the actual hole, you don't have that data, right?
Yeah.
So my question, Michael, is, can you think about a time during this period where you didn't have enough data, but you were running against the clock? You had to make a decision. And sometimes looking back on it, you're like, well, we could have probably adjusted it, or what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, 100%. And in fact, your point's such a good one, because if you think about somebody came to you and said, all right, there's an idea for a business where you're going to actually pay a complete stranger to take you somewhere that you've never met before. Well, what was the market for that before the market was there? Like, was the market for Uber was zero before the market? Like, so what would the data have said? The data would said that, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, probably the biggest one for me is you literally had to make a choice, like a lot of people do, that there's certain customers you can't serve. Like, you've got a certain expense base. Every one of our customers were health plans and employers, like big companies. And some customers they're not profitable, or some customers are going to be profitable if they grow, but they're not profitable when you had to, without data, right? You had to basically go and make a decision about which customers that you would pick up the phone and say, listen, we've got to do things just like everybody else is doing, make choices about what we're going to do, and we just can't service you anymore. And those are hard decisions to make, because you work really hard to get those customer relationships. But there wasn't some magic crystal ball or I shouldn't even say magic crystal ball. There wasn't any information or data about, well, what's going to happen if you go to this big employer in this state? Will you ever be able to recover in that state? If you go to this health plan and you say we can't serve you anymore, will you ever, like a Blue Cross Blue Shield, right? Will you ever be able? You have 50 other Blue Cross Blue Shield clients. Is the rumor going to spread? Like, you have to get really, really, people say all the time, you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Well, this is comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, you have to take risks, because the risk of not acting was much, much greater than the risk of acting and getting it wrong.
What I always love about tough times, bus cycles, if you will, is it allows all of us to get away from our ivory tower sometimes and be able to look into our business at a micro level, like you mentioned, and bring the creativity and innovation. During this time, Michael, how do you feel like by plugging up the holes, by reanalyzing your business at a micro level, you said, okay, at a macro level, I can't control some things, but all these other things I can. How do you feel like some of that, and revisiting some of those systems, processes, techniques, marketing strategies, maybe business structure, whatever it is, and how it actually helps you level up your business to have then a successful exit later on?
Yeah, it's interesting. You never accept the premise that you don't control things because that's what you're supposed to do as a CEO, right? It's like stuff happens in the world, you're supposed to be prepared for it, and we just weren't. So you always take responsibility for that. I think that we literally said we've got to start to look at every part of the business differently because the math doesn't add up. So for us, Christian, it wasn't that hard to look at that way. Just we knew if we just kept going down the path, it wouldn't work because all of our clients were the companies that were going bankrupt every day. So in a lot of ways, it was easy to take a completely different perspective, like some of the ones I shared with you, because you didn't have any choice. Like if you just look at where the math was going, you're like, who's going to be our next client in the middle of 2008? Like they're not going to be new people. Everybody existing is going to cut our type of thing. Like there wasn't a path, so you literally had to make it up, or else you knew you wouldn't have survived. So, and also to talk about survival when 6 months earlier we got offered a number that I can't even repeat to sell the business was surreal to everybody. But you literally just had to say, we got to start to look at everything differently. When somebody would say to us, no, I want my $100, I'll call it Bed Bath and Beyond because they're in the news today, Bed Bath and Beyond gift certificate. And we're like, we weren't able to negotiate with Bed Bath and Beyond. We're going to give you $400 of Amazon, right? Because the $400 on Amazon, we had negotiated a deal that it cost us 10 cents. I mean, you didn't, they're like, we can't give you a Bed Bath Beyond. Like there were just a lot of times at that time where you had to be steadfast in getting from point A to point B, but you couldn't have gotten to point A to point B if you didn't look at every single thing about the way you were doing things. You just wouldn't have survived. So in some ways, the fate was already dictated for us that we had to make those changes.
So because of that pressure externally, and you had to revisit every aspect of your business, that actually helped you then later on scale and have a successful exit, and implementing these systems. Did you have to, I'm curious, hire new people or maybe other talent acquisition to help you level up? And once you get to that next like phase 2, phase 3, where it's like, okay, we've got expenses down, we've got revenue, okay, cool, that's a line now. We've got to hit a foundation. Now we can start kind of looking about scaling and building again, right? Because that really at the beginning you just had to really stop the boat from sinking, and that was the big thing. And then you had started pivoting. Can you give us a little bit of the timeline on those kind of phases?
Yeah. So a couple things about 2008. You didn't get a letter in the mail or an email or a text that said this will last 627 days, right? Like, so you're like, this could be a year, it could be, remember what people talked about. Think about the way people were talking about Silicon Valley Bank about 2 weeks ago. Is this an isolated thing or is this going to be the next 5-year thing? So that was one of the hardest parts, Chris, is you don't have a time. Like you don't have a time that goes from point A to point B. The other thing I will say, and you alluded to it before, is you learn skills that you didn't think you had. And you emerge, right, or start to emerge after for us, about 2.5 years. Now, remember, those 2.5 years sound really sexy right now, 20 hours a day, every day of the week, right? You're in survival mode, right? Because again, our fundamental issue is that there's no customers, like there's nobody buying anything, and all of our existing customers are bankrupt. So do the math. I remember when in a board meeting, somebody said, what's the worst case scenario? And I'm like, 0, right? So you learn things. And so, but when we started to emerge from that, it all seemed easy. It all seemed so like, and remember, we had already been bigger. So scaling wasn't hard. We had already done it before. We had already built sales teams and account management teams, and the technology was already built. So for us, it was just putting, now the holes in the dam are better and things are starting to grow. And in the world, everybody started to care about healthcare because it'd been completely ignored during the crisis. So the biggest problem that companies were having were their healthcare costs. So the stars started to align. And so for us to build back on top is something that we already done. And so we just kind of redeployed the formula and had some just amazing leaders around me and people around me that made great sacrifices along the way to get us from point A to point B. But at that point, from that point forward, I don't know if I call it easy, but it certainly seemed easy. Maybe it's just somebody stops kicking between the legs, then everything seems like it's the first page. I'll tell you this: after we sold Lonely Entrepreneur, which we'll get into, or sold in Cent One, and we wrote the book Lonely Entrepreneur, the first page of the book is about what we call the cold shower. I used to work out every day in the morning at 5 in the morning. And one day I was working out, I was taking a shower afterwards, and there was no hot water. And it was, hit me, and you go, whoa. And this is how nuts we are as entrepreneurs. I was like, I wonder how much that you can take. And so every day I would stand under the cold shower to the point where I got it up to 5 minutes. And I was like, if you could do this every day, then what happens during the day all seems easy. I would encourage your listeners, go stand in the shower for 5 minutes under freezing cold water, and everything else. So, you just do these things but when you come out of that, Christian, both personally and health wise and just the company's health wise, I don't know, it just all seems much easier than it was.
I appreciate
I
that
appreciate that
perspective.
perspective.
And I'm
And
curious,
I'm curious,
just to kind of, string on that a little
string
bit
on that a
further.
little bit further.
Now that you
Now
know
that you
that
know that
being in a
being in a
condensed,
condensed,
tough situation
situation
helps you grow
helps
at a
you
very
grow at a very
exponential level.
exponential level.
And then you can,
And then you can
later on, once you get
later on,
beyond
once
that,
you
it's
get
like,
beyond
oh,
that,
this
it's
is
like, oh,
life
this
is easy,
life
whatever.
is easy, whatever.
What do you do
What do
now,
you do
Michael,
now, Michael,
to get yourself
yourself
in those
in those
tough,
tough,
difficult, uncomfortable situations intentionally to ensure that you are growing and you are scaling in certain skills that you are very intentional with?
For me, that was never hard because I was always somebody that pushed, right? And so that was always a very natural thing. In fact, I had to, like a lot of entrepreneurs, had to scale it back. I came off from being a college athlete and a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. So being kind of a lunatic about this stuff. Remember back in my old M&A days, you would say, as a young guy in my 20s, somebody you would say, you need to be in Paris in 3 hours, some partner at a law firm, and I'd be like, but the flight's 6 hours. They're like, figure it out, right? That's the world that I came from. So pushing was never the issue. What was the issue for us was that people were beat up. Our people were beat up. And so now they were smiling more and they felt better, but it'd been a long, road over the course couple of years. So one thing we did that I'm probably one of the things I'm the most proud of is I was saying to myself, okay, how do we get everybody to perform at a higher level? How do we take it to the next level? When you could have just been like, we're just going to chill for a little bit. Like we're just going to, and that's the way we think as CEOs. We're always talking about growing and moving. And we said to ourselves, okay, how do you get really people to do this? And so we did something that we're incredibly proud of. We went to everybody in the companies, now it's probably 500, 600 employees, whatever it was. And we said, we want to interview and we want to ask you what you want. And you're like, what do you mean what I want? And the first answer was what you'd expect when the CEO and, somebody else sits down with you. They would say, I want to be better at, I want to learn the product better and I want to learn how to, communicate. But I was like, no, not what you want for the company, but what you want. And to a certain extent, we felt we really owed that to them. And every time they answered about the company, we're like, I don't want to hear about the company, right? And so and again, these are fresh in my head, even though they're years and years ago. One woman said, I want my mom to stop smoking. Somebody else said that I've always wanted to learn how to sing opera. Another one said that I want to learn how to cook. And so we took all of our time and effort and relationships and influence, and instead of having stupid pizza parties, which we did too, we took all of our money and we started getting these things for people. And we wrote a chapter about it in the book. We called, help people with their bucket list and performance will follow. What started to happen? People started learning the product more. People started, right, becoming more proactive. People were covering for each other. And it was one of the things that we did where, and today, one of our customer service reps is literally a professional opera singer. And so anyway, this is one thing I would say to this, it relates to our earlier conversation. What we lack as entrepreneurs in capital and resources, we do not lack in creativity. And so the ability to bring new and different ways of thinking about things. So you can imagine now these employees have hair on fire. We had people coming to work in New Jersey and they were sitting in traffic. We're like, why shouldn't you start work at 10 o'clock? So you don't have to sit in traffic and you can actually have breakfast with your kid. Like just now in this day and age of work for home, that's not so strange. But back then it would be like, oh my God, you're not at work at 8:15. And remember, I came from a very hardcore environment. I came from New York M&A, so this is not natural for me. But you just try to get a sense of the tone of where your organization is and try to get them. And we got performance from people even after working their asses off for years through this whole thing with a lot of stress, that people were performing at a level that wasn't just 2 or 3% better, it was probably 30 or 40% better because of the things that we did.
That is incredible on bottom line and top line to see that massive 20-30% increase and how it effectively just infused so much energy, the resources, the resourcefulness of these individuals, just because you were thinking externally and creatively of a different problem. I just think that's very interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the exit. And I know we're not able to talk a little bit about the numbers, but really about the context, how you thought about it, how you navigated it, and how you made sure that it was a good transition at a higher level. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about, obviously lonely entrepreneur and how that evolved and so forth. But first, let's dive into the exit and how you navigated it once you got to that point. And you're like, okay, I think we're ready. And what was your mindset and what was your perspective around, a successful exit?
Yeah. It always, in a lot of ways, it always comes down to numbers. You got to get where you want to get to. But I think probably more importantly, as CEOs, you get a sense of the market. And so on the other end of the financial crisis, everybody was interested in healthcare. And I think a lot of people realized that we had really beaten up on employees and others in the economy, that you weren't going to get them to improve on their health, right? You weren't, a big health plan wasn't going to be able to go to somebody or an employer that just fired a bunch of people, wasn't going to be able, please go take care of yourself. They'd be like, screw you, right? So you just got a sense that this was going to be a time. But what also starts to happen is, as you're growing again, what starts to happen is people start to approach you differently. Customers like health plans that would approach, but then they'd also have their venture groups reaching out to you, right? And other people are starting to, so you could really start to sense that incentivizing healthy behavior was something that was coming up the wave, right? You were riding the wave, but everybody was going to jump in, right? Everybody was going to go there, because if you created the best diabetes solution, people weren't going to respond unless you incentivized them, because we just beat the hell out of them for 3 years, right? So as CEO, I could just sense that the wave was coming, and there were a lot of people kicking our tires. There were a lot of people that were approaching us and having different types of conversations, not just, hey, this would be a really interesting solution for our health plan, but we'd also like you to talk to our venture group, which is the opposite of what they normally do. So you could get a sense that this was going to come and it was going to last a period of time. And so, that's when you throw out buoys, right? You talk to people, you get a sense of people, and you start to drive it. And then it just took, once that happens, it starts to take on a life of its own. And with all the struggles we had because of 2008, we were really the inventor of the industry. And so when it became clear rather, that this is a solution that everybody's going to do, we were able to position ourselves in such a way, through relationships we had and others, that somebody's going to get this. And if you want it to be you, there's a process we're going to go through, and it happened. And by the way I'm describing right now is a lot simpler than it ever was. I always describe it like, oh yeah, I just wrote a number on a napkin and whatever. It was the way I describe it today is build it, save it, sell it. And each one of those were unique journeys, as was the time of, recovering and selling the company.
Well, it's just like when you're looking for a buyer, it's the same thing as like an interviewing process, right? As much as they want to buy your company, right? And you're the seller. You are also interviewing them, and you want to make sure that there's alignment, not just on the number side. We can talk about that later offline, but really also the culture is one of the big aspects. Is this buyer, are they going to expand and keep that culture and do their cultures align? And is that also something that was part of the conversation when you were, like you mentioned, putting your buoys out and started realizing, okay, you're getting some hooks, and you started realizing, okay, you have maybe 5, 10 individuals that are interested. Cool. But now you were filtering those individuals upon, okay, hey, not only the number, are they going to hit that? Cool, wonderful check, but also the culture. What are their goals? What are their dreams with this company when they acquire it? And the second part of the question is what did that evolution look like for a smooth transaction? What I mean by is you have to talk to your people and give them anticipation, and then as well as did you stay on for a little while to make sure obviously it was integrated properly.
Yeah, I mean, culture and lots of other things go into it, right? You have to, your investors and you and your team and, the people that not just built the company, but also the people that got us through 2008. We had set up compensation structures for them where they all won, so that was good. But yeah, all those things go into it. One of the final bidders of it was a French company, and we were concerned that how committed they would be to the U.S., right? Even though they might have were really interested in the process. So, yeah, like entrepreneurs today, there's a lot that goes into the soup when you sell a company. There's just everything goes into it, and you have a bunch of different perspectives and people that you have to align to that. And in the end, that all felt right. I know for me, I did stay around for a little while, but a completely different capacity. I told them, I said, if I'm going to still run it, I'm not going to sell it. I was like, if you want it and you want to buy it, I will help you, but nothing reports to me, right? I have great people and I want those people to be empowered to do it. And I will help, right? Do as much as I can. I'll go talk to customers. I'll help with strategy, but none of the business can report to me because if it's going to report to me, then I'll keep it. And I hope that they respected that and it put us in a position for them to do their thing. And also, the one thing I did do um, is I hope, educated our people. I'm like, it's not going to be the same because, it's like somebody adopting your baby, right? And I'm like, and we have to be okay with that. Like, you can't be like it used to be this way because you're going to think that every day, right? The pencils were blue and now they're going to be green, and the way that we did things collaboratively and uh, and just fix problems and solve problems. And as you can imagine, we had an incredible can-do attitude, given everything that we had, right, um, been through, right? So we were just like, yep, problem. There's always a way. Like, think about one of the things we say in the book is that's the way entrepreneurs think. There's always a way, and it's certainly true. And we had that mentality. So definitely preparing. That was probably the hardest part, is preparing the team for what was going to be a new environment, because while I was going to be there, it just wasn't going to be ours anymore. But in the end, it worked out pretty good.
I appreciate you kind of unpacking that a little bit because it's one of the things that I find so interesting, specifically about like the financials. Yes, everybody wants to make money, but also the culture and make sure there's alignment on
Yeah.
both. Because obviously you want to make sure it's a good transaction, not just for yourself, but like you mentioned, you have a responsibility for these people that have
Yeah.
compensation packages and alignment and love of the passion for the company and what it stands for. And then, I've seen some that have got bought up, but it's like later on, what do they do with it? There was no massive, good alignment, whatever. So
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about your incredible, the lonely entrepreneur. This is what you say on your website, and I found this very, I love this. Information is everywhere. Intelligence is rare. True insight comes from the struggle, like we just talked about, knowing what works under the influence of the passion, pressure, pleasure, and pain of being the entrepreneur. You have an incredible community, consulting, speaking, and corporate events that you do underneath this amazing umbrella of the lonely entrepreneur. After having an exit, a lot of people want to just go out and buy a yacht or buy an island and have some fun. You decided not to. You decided to get back into it and help others. What I always like to say is get to the top of the mountain, right? And I think that's very, very honorable. So where did that evolution come from? Where did that idea come from? Where it's like this is where you want to spend the next time and your energy and effort.
Christian, I'm not a serial entrepreneur, nor did I emerge rather from that experience with my company being sold, saying I wanted to help other entrepreneurs. Like, that was not in my mind. I was literally just taking a deep breath and kind of reconnecting with life and friends and things like that. For me, I'm only attracted to the idea. Rewarding people for being healthy was like, okay, it's white space. It helps society. It helps people, and it has to check all of those boxes for me. Remember, and so for me to get interested in something again would take all of those things, especially because I just sold the company and I could do whatever I wanted, right, including nothing. So I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't A lot of people that are successful want to give back and help entrepreneurs. That was not my mindset at all. I was literally in New York City relaxing, just helping friends and friends of friends who were starting businesses for fun, right? And one of them said to me, being an entrepreneur is really lonely. And I was like, huh? forgot, but frankly forgot about it. And like 2 weeks later, I was walking down the street with a friend of mine in Union Square, New York, and I said lonely entrepreneur, and he said, "What did you say?" And I said lonely entrepreneur. He's like, "Oh my God, what is that? That's brilliant. I've never heard that." I'm like, "What do you mean? It's just a phrase." He goes, "Are you kidding me?" And he goes into a Starbucks, and I'm like, "What is he doing?" And he stops when he walks in the Starbucks and he yells, top of his lungs. This is like 2015-ish, 16. Who here is a lonely entrepreneur? And literally everybody put their hand up. And I was like, okay. You have all of these people that have passion and energy and great ideas, and it's not translating into success, or at least the success. Wow, if you could wake up and do anything every day, why not do that? But I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, okay, cool. And then what really got me interested, because remember, I'm a technology guy, I'm a product guy. Like, I was like, how do people learn how to do what they need to do? There's this like random hodgepodge of stuff that they have to try to figure out on them. Like, why couldn't you build a platform? Like, why couldn't there be a one-stop shop where everybody gets everything they need? So that's what Lonely Entrepreneur became. We built this platform called the Learning Community because my desire was to help everybody. There's somebody in Jacksonville, in Seattle, in Shanghai that's trying to do it, and right now they're going all over the place to try to figure out, wow, if you had a platform that you could put in people's hands and give them a better chance of success, then that's what really got me excited about Lonely Entrepreneur. It was not just the name and the mission of it, right? But the fact that there was this gaping hole of people that were, right, Googling and talking to people with the same last name as them to try to figure out how to spend their life savings and if you can have an impact on millions and millions of people. So again, for me, Christian, it was the idea, right? And then just how that very, very organically, and you can see how it just so organically connected back to my healthcare company because we had been through this whole struggle. So I couldn't have planned it any better.
Well, it's so interesting the evolution, and you're exactly right. That's why I mentioned this. Information is everywhere. Intelligence is rare,
Yeah.
and where you've been creating a huge ecosystem where it does attract people from all different verticals, but at the end of this day, they're very similar in this where they're at in the stage. So
Yeah.
you have got a really amazing heartbeat on these entrepreneurs. What are you noticing? Some of them that are kind of where they're at, where they're struggling. What are some of the big things? Is it more of a mindset? Is it more of just a lack of skills that they need to acquire to be able to, level up? Is it more of just, maybe the talent acquisition or creativity? What do you find is one of the biggest things that are kind of along this journey of a lonely entrepreneur that they struggle with?
Yeah. I think we did a real disservice to entrepreneurs by saying, if you go back, 10 or 15 years, as long as you have passion and grit and a good idea, you're good. And that's literally what we said, right? And as long as you slam your head into the wall harder than the next guy or gal, then you'll be fine. And that's really what we told people, right? Put the little E on your chest, entrepreneur, and you can do all kinds of stupid, crazy stuff. Or put differently, if I said to you now, after I get off this with you, Christian, I'm going to go perform heart surgery. And you're like, oh, Michael, I didn't realize you were a heart surgeon. I'm like, I'm not a heart surgeon. I'm just going to try heart surgery. That's what we did with entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship is so complicated in the year 2023 and even before. There's so much that goes into it, including your heart, your soul, your passion, your pressure, your pain. Like there's just all this stuff in the soup where it's like, just go figure it out. And so I think really, right, passion, grit, and a good idea is not enough. It's a series of lots and lots of skills. A lot of times people say as entrepreneurs, if I could just blank, and that blank is different for everybody, right? And so I think first and foremost, you have to embrace the fact that you've got to get better at it. Like you've got to learn a whole series of skills, right, across the different things that you do that will increase your chances of success. Now, there's a lot of those. There's probably hundreds of those, and that's one of the things we try to do with our learning community. What I'd say is this: a lot of entrepreneurs go into it with a lack of some of the core fundamentals, right? The core fundamentals being, what's my goal personally? What's the financial goal of the company, right? If I want to create one pizza stand, that's one plan. If I want to create Pizza Hut, that's the next plan, a different plan. So I got to have it. If I don't have a financial goal, if I don't have some core projections, and then probably the one area that I still think is the most important is what we call at Lonely Entrepreneur, finding a playground where nobody else is playing. We live in such a world of clutter that it's not enough to say, well, let me put these two things next to each other and compare which one's better, and then somebody will buy or not buy my solution. Think about our email every day. There's tons of, like, we could have the launch codes or the lottery numbers in our email and we never pay attention to it. So to me, finding that playground where everybody else is selling apples and you're selling oranges, which is incredibly hard to find. Think of rewarding people for being healthy, right? There were tons and tons of loyalty programs at the time with lots of big competitors, American Express, Visa, MasterCard. We just applied it to healthcare, right? And we're so, to me, Christian, even though there's a lot of blocking and tackling that goes into that, um, you got to set a personal goal. You got to have a financial plan aligned to that goal. And if you don't get your playground right, you can do all the stuff. You can do social. Remember, we all use the same tools. We all use the same marketing, the same social media, the same email, the same web. Like, if we all use the same stuff, why does somebody win? I'll give you a very specific example that hopefully will help the people listening. Woman, she's a nurse. She gets tired of being a nurse. She always was very interested in helping people with financial planning and their financial lives. And so she becomes a financial planner, only to learn that there's 7 trillion financial planners, right? No surprise, like every industry. And so we were just talking to her about helping her find a playground. She had only a couple of clients that were paying her to do financial planning. And we asked her about her clients, and they were all nurses. And we're like, you're going to become the financial planner for nurses. So now she went from being one of 7 million to one of one, maybe not one of 8. And now, if you're a nurse, so now in her playground, she sets the rules. She talks nurse, she speaks nurse, and so if you're a nurse, you go to her. So that to me, Christian, and to the team at Lonely Entrepreneur, if you get that right, a lot of other things line up. And that's something a lot of times entrepreneurs don't do. They're like, I have good cookies, I'm gonna go bake cookies, and then I'll figure out the rest later.
You know what I find so interesting is I was talking to someone that was running a mid-8-figure business, and they were kind of the same situation. It's like, yes, they have product market fit. Yes, they were able to really scale, and they were making some money, top line. But even then, they still kind of lost who they were and who they were servicing. And the reason I'm saying that is because I love that example, where they were able to target and identify and say, yes, you're a financial advisor, but you're also just specifically for nurses, and that lingo, and then now all of a sudden you attract those individuals specifically. And like you mentioned, there's so many different tools that you can use, but you gotta get clear on what's your result. And Jeffrey's goals are drastically different than Susie's goals, and really understanding what do you want, how do you want to live, and do you want to just sell baked cookies at the local store? Cool, that's awesome. You can make a lot of money with it. Or do you want to build the next cookie empire? Well, just depends, right? Every goal, and then reverse engineering the skills that you need to be able to get there.
So when you create one pizza stand, right? Just all you need is an oven, and you do it yourself, and you make every slice. And if you're creating Pizza Hut, you should go raise private equity money, right? It's a completely different plan. It's when you don't make that distinction, right? And you're wiggling in the middle, and you're like, oh, I need a lot of money to do this. You're like, and now I've burnt my life savings and all that fun stuff.
And that's never fun. So right. I'm curious. I really just appreciate you being on here, Michael, and just talking about all this fun stuff. And I always love to ask my guests, one, where can they reach you? How can they reach out to your community? How can they be part of what you got going on? I know you've got tons of resources. You've been featured in tons of different places, MSNBC, Forbes, the Entrepreneur Magazine, all this fun stuff. How can they reach out? How can they communicate with what you got going on, man?
First of all, thank you so much for the privilege of being here. I really appreciate it. We take the passion of entrepreneurs very, very seriously because we've been through it, as I know you have. And everything's Lonely Entrepreneur. So lonelyentrepreneur.com, lonelyentrepreneur.org is our nonprofit. All the social media channels are The Lonely Entrepreneur, right? Twitter's The Lonely E, but you can find us on pretty much everything The Lonely Entrepreneur. The Lonely Entrepreneur book is available on our site and through Amazon. So everything Lonely Entrepreneur. But the core website is lonelyentrepreneur.com. And as I mentioned, the core thing that we're trying to do is our learning community. Our 2 main offerings are, it's a subscription-based product that you can get all this stuff that hopefully helps you. And for those of you that are further along, we do consulting and try to help, on the growth of these issues. But it all comes down to a lot of the issues that we've been talking through today, and a very we hope genuine stewardship of a lot of the passion that people put into this.
Awesome, guys. Those links are in the description below, so make sure you stop what you're doing and consume a lot of that content. A lot of his book is really amazing. On the lonelyentrepreneur.com, his website's got tons of content out there. And like I mentioned, I'll put his blog and all the places that he's been featured, his other interviews. Really, really great stuff. You should just consume and learn. Michael, I really appreciate being on here. One of the biggest things I always love to ask before I let you go fully, you've done very well. Now you've been able to look back and help others achieve incredible successes. And during this journey, Michael, you think about that young Michael to what you've been able to do now. What insecurities did you have to overcome yourself personally to become the successful Michael Dermer you are now?
I didn't have any insecurities. No, I'm just kidding. I think, I don't know if it necessarily call it an insecurity, but I think it's the right balance of ego and humility. Remember, Christian, as I showed before, I came off from being a college athlete and an M&A lawyer and a boy. None of that screams humility. And I think that one of the things that you have to really grow as is you have to have a healthy dose of ego. And I don't mean ego in a bad way, because all of us are saying to someone, you're going to do something different. I'm going to put something in front of you. For us, we were asking the whole healthcare industry, right? You have to have, people are like, we're never doing this, we're never doing it. You have to have a healthy ego to bring something different to the table. And that's a good thing. You need that. But if that ego is not combined with the right level of humility, because you have to be humble enough to do what I said before, which is to understand that you have to learn and grow as an entrepreneur. And if you don't, you will fail. And so, and those two things are oftentimes in conflict, because a lot of times you got to run through the wall and you got to take people with you and you got to paint a vision, and that takes ego. If you do not do that with humility to learn and grow as a leader and entrepreneur, like a lot of times people that start businesses, they never wanted to be CEO. They're just a good chef or a good technologist or a good physician or a good, right? You name it. And so for me, I think what I had to overcome, was my own perspective of where I'd come in life from sports and being a corporate lawyer of just go, go, go. And if you're not fast enough to keep up, then that's your problem. And it's completely the opposite. It's I'm successful if I can get others to do stuff. I can get me to do stuff, right? But can I get, in a genuine way, customers and employees and investors to do the types of things that they need to do? And so for me, it probably was some insecurity about, well, wait a minute, I'm going to admit that I don't know stuff. Ooh, right? And in fact, when we launched our Black initiatives, one of the things that our Black leaders say is, we can't admit that we don't know stuff. That's not accepted in our communities, and that's something we can't do because blah, blah, blah. So I just think that was the biggest thing for me, Christian, is just understanding that being humble as a leader, to go side by side with that ego, will be instrumental to your success. And if you don't do it, it'll be your downfall.
That is such a cool silver lining of ego and humility, and that could be a whole other conversation on the podcast. So we will have to have you on again. I love that wisdom there. Guys, that is the CEO and founder of The Lonely Entrepreneur, my friend, the one and only Michael Dermer. Guys, that is Journey with Christian Davis podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.